Have you ever stopped to wonder, in the middle of the laughter and the colorful costumes, what you are truly celebrating on October 31st? Have you ever felt a faint, unsettling echo behind the cheerful demands for candy, a shadow that the bright orange of pumpkins cannot quite dispel? Most people see Halloween as a harmless night of fun, a modern tradition of make-believe and sweets for children. But this is a profound and dangerous misunderstanding. The truth is that beneath the plastic masks and sugary treats lies a terrible origin. A history so steeped in darkness that its roots reach into the very practices God condemns. What if the games you play are echoes of ancient, terrifying rituals? What if the symbols you embrace are not just innocent decorations, but gateways to a spiritual reality you have been taught to ignore? Tonight, we will pull back the veil. We will journey into the past, not to spoil a holiday, but to reveal a truth that has been intentionally hidden, sanitized, and repackaged for mass consumption. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to discover about the true beginning of Halloween will change the way you see this night forever. To understand the core of Halloween, we must first understand that its origins have absolutely nothing to do with candy, parties, or playful frights. Its true beginning is grim, born from a worldview saturated with fear, superstition, and a desperate need to appease unseen forces. We are not talking about a simple harvest festival. We are talking about a time when the lines between the natural and the supernatural were believed to be dangerously thin, a night governed by dark rituals designed to pacify vengeful spirits. Historical records and archaeological findings point to a disturbing reality where animal, and in some accounts even human sacrifices, were considered necessary offerings to the gods of death and the underworld. This was not a celebration of life or harvest, it was a confrontation with death itself, an annual rite of passage through the darkest night of the year, and the methods used were born of pure terror. The very foundation of this celebration is not joy, but a deep, primal fear of the spirits of the dead and the coming darkness. Our journey takes us back over 2,000 years, to the ancient Celtic people who inhabited the lands we now know as Ireland, Scotland, and parts of Northern Europe. Their lives were intimately tied to the rhythm of the seasons, and their most significant festival was not in the spring or summer, but on the cusp of winter. They called this festival Samhain, a name that literally means summer's end. On their calendar, the new year began on November 1st. Therefore, October 31st was New Year's Eve, but it was a night filled with dread, not celebration. For the Celts, Samhain marked the definitive end of the harvest and the light-filled half of the year, and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a season they profoundly associated with death, decay, and human mortality. It was a time when the earth seemed to die, when the sun weakened, and the nights grew long and perilous. This seasonal shift was not just a physical event. For the Celts, it was a deeply spiritual one, a time when the very fabric of reality seemed to fray. This leads us to the central belief that powered the entire festival of Samhain, the opening of the spiritual frontier. The Celts held a powerful conviction that on the night of October 31st, the boundary, the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead, became porous and weak. It was as if a door was opened, allowing the spirits of all who had died in the preceding year to return to Earth, seeking to possess the bodies of the living. But it wasn't just the recently deceased they feared. They believed that all manner of supernatural entities, both benevolent ancestral spirits and malevolent demons, could freely cross over and walk among them. This belief created an atmosphere of immense spiritual anxiety. It was a time of cosmic chaos, where the natural order was suspended. Imagine living in a small village, huddled against the cold, believing that just outside your door, ghosts, fairies, and demonic beings were roaming the darkened landscape. This wasn't a fantasy. To them, it was a terrifying annual reality that required specific actions and rituals to survive the night unscathed. At the heart of these rituals were the Celtic priests, known as the Druids. They were the spiritual intermediaries, the ones who were believed to understand the movements of the spirit world and how to interact with it. On the night of Samhain, the Druids would extinguish all the hearth fires in the homes of the villagers. Then, they would gather on sacred hilltops to build enormous ritual bonfires. These fires were not for warmth or light, They were sacred flames intended to honor their sun god, Lugh, and to frighten away the evil spirits lurking in the darkness. It was at these bonfires that the most sinister acts took place. The Druids would offer sacrifices to appease the gods and the spirits of the dead. Crops and animals were burned in the flames. And while some modern historians debate the extent of the practice, several ancient Roman accounts, including those from Julius Caesar, describe the Druids as practicing human sacrifice, sometimes in horrific ways, such as burning people alive in giant wicker effigies. Alongside these sacrifices, the Druids practiced forms of divination, attempting to foretell the future by examining the remains of the sacrificed animals or by interpreting the patterns in the flames. They believed that on this night, when the spirit world was so close, their ability to predict the fortunes of the coming year was at its most powerful. After the grand, terrifying spectacle on the hilltop concluded, the ceremony was far from over. The individual villagers had a crucial role to play. Each family would take an ember or a lit torch from the Druids' sacred bonfire and carry it back to their own dwelling. This was a profoundly symbolic act. With this sacred flame, they would relight the hearth fire in their home, a fire that had been deliberately extinguished earlier. This wasn't just about starting a fire for warmth. It was a ritual of purification and protection. The flame, born from the Druids' communion with the gods, was believed to carry a divine blessing that would shield the family from demonic forces and bring good fortune throughout the long, dark winter ahead. The entire community, which began the night in darkness and isolation, was now reconnected and protected by a single, sacred source of light. But the protection of the sacred fire within their homes was not considered enough to navigate the horrors of the night itself. The most pressing danger was encountering a spirit while outside, and so the Celts developed a strategy of spiritual camouflage. This is the true, primal origin of the Halloween costume. It was not about fun or festivity. It was a desperate act of survival. To fool the malevolent spirits roaming the earth, people would disguise themselves. They would don costumes made from animal skins and even wear the heads of slaughtered animals as masks. The goal was twofold. First, by appearing as a fellow spirit or a grotesque beast, they hoped to blend in with the supernatural procession and be overlooked by any entity seeking a human host to possess. Imagine the sight. Villagers cloaked in rough hides, their faces obscured by the skull of a goat or a boar, moving silently through the night, not as a prank, but out of genuine terror. The second purpose was to actively frighten away spirits. By making themselves look as horrifying as possible, they hoped to intimidate any lesser demons or mischievous fairies they might encounter. It was a psychological defense mechanism, an attempt to become the monster in the dark so the real monsters would leave you alone. This fear also led to another practice that echoes down to our modern traditions. The Celts believed that the spirits of the dead were not just wandering aimlessly. Many were returning to visit their former homes. Some of these might be benevolent ancestors, but others could be vengeful or simply hungry. To placate these wandering souls and ensure they didn't try to enter the home or curse the family, villagers would leave offerings of food and drink on their doorsteps. This was a form of appeasement, a bribe to the spirit world. "Here is our offering," the gesture said. "Take it and pass us by in peace." This practice of leaving out food to pacify supernatural beings is the ancient, fearful ancestor of our modern trick-or-treating. There was no trick involved, only the terrifying consequence of failing to provide a treat to a potentially malevolent ghost. However, it would be a mistake to view Samhain as a night of pure, unadulterated terror. It was far more complex than that. Alongside the fear of demons and evil spirits was a deep-seated reverence for ancestors. While they took measures to ward off the unwanted supernatural, they also actively invited the spirits of their departed loved ones into their homes. A place would be set at the dinner table, complete with food and drink, for the ghosts of family members who had passed on. It was a night of remembrance and communion. They believed their ancestors, crossing back through the thin veil, could offer wisdom, protection, and blessings for the coming year. So you have this incredible duality. A family huddled around their sacred hearth fire, terrified of the demonic entities scratching at their door, while simultaneously leaving that same door metaphorically open, with a place set at the table in loving welcome for the spirit of a deceased grandmother or father. This blend of terror and tenderness, of warding off and welcoming in, is at the very core of what made Samhain such a powerful and enduring festival. It acknowledged the entire spectrum of the spiritual world, from the demonic to the divine, and understood that on this one night, humanity was caught directly in the middle. And at the center of all this ritual, both the fearful and the familial, were the community's spiritual leaders, the Druids. Samhain was arguably the most important night of the year for them. They were the intermediaries, the ones who understood the rules of this supernatural intersection. On the evening of Samhain, a powerful ritual would take place across the Celtic lands. Every family would extinguish the fire in their hearth, plunging their homes and the entire village into a profound, oppressive darkness. This wasn't just to save fuel. It was a deeply symbolic act. It was a reset, a communal death of the old year's light and warmth, leaving the entire community vulnerable and exposed in the cold dark, united in their shared blackness. Then, the Druids would construct and light a massive sacred bonfire. This wasn't just any fire. It was a need fire, often built with specific sacred woods like oak, believed to have protective properties. They would chant and make offerings, sometimes including parts of the harvest or even animal sacrifices, casting them into the flames to appease the gods and honor the dead. This colossal blaze served multiple purposes. It was a beacon of hope against the encroaching winter, a powerful symbol of the sun's dwindling power. It was a tool of purification. Villagers and their livestock would often walk between two large bonfires, believing the smoke and flames would cleanse them of sickness and protect them from evil. And most importantly, it was a weapon. The light and heat were thought to be a powerful ward, pushing back the malevolent spirits that roamed the night, creating a consecrated, protected space for the living. Once the main rituals were complete, each family would take a burning ember or a lit torch from this central, sacred bonfire back to their own home. With it, they would relight their personal hearth. This act symbolically brought the protective, purifying power of the community's sacred fire into the heart of each household, ensuring their safety through the long, dark night and the coming winter. It was a tangible link between every home and the spiritual authority of the Druids. This unique confluence of events, the veil being at its thinnest, the spirits of the dead walking the earth, and the sacred fires burning, created the perfect conditions for another key aspect of Samhain, divination. If the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was porous, it meant that the boundary between the present and the future was equally thin. For the Celts, whose lives were so dependent on the unpredictable turning of the seasons, knowing what the future held was not a trivial party game. It was a matter of survival. The coming winter could bring famine or fortune, sickness or health, life or death. So, they practiced numerous forms of fortune-telling on this night, hoping to gain a glimpse, however fleeting, into the year ahead. Many of these divination rituals revolved around the recent harvest, particularly apples and nuts. Apples, in Celtic mythology, were often associated with the other world and immortality. One common practice involved peeling an apple in one long, continuous strand. The person would then swing the peel around their head and let it drop to the floor. The shape it formed was believed to be the initial of their future spouse. Another, which you might recognize, involved a tub of water filled with apples. Young, unmarried people would try to bite an apple out of the water without using their hands. The first to succeed was believed to be the next one to marry. This wasn't just a game of dexterity, it was a serious query put to the fates. Similarly, nuts were used to predict the course of a romance. A young couple would place 2 nuts on the hearth near the fire, one representing each of them. If the nuts roasted quietly and steadily side by side, it signified a long and true union. But if they hissed, cracked, and jumped apart from the heat, it foretold a turbulent and doomed relationship. Imagine the tension in the room, the silence punctuated only by the crackle of the fire, as a young couple watched their entire future being decided by the behavior of a pair of roasting hazelnuts. These weren't just quaint folk customs. They were deeply serious attempts to navigate a world that felt chaotic and often hostile. The information gleaned on Samhain night could influence major life decisions: who to marry, when to plant, whether to move the herds to a new pasture. Other forms of divination were even more direct. A druid might interpret the patterns of smoke rising from the great bonfire, or the shapes formed by casting molten lead into cold water. Some traditions speak of more intense, even harrowing rituals, where a seer would wrap themselves in the hide of a freshly sacrificed bull and lie down beside a waterfall or in a burial mound to receive visions of the future. The barrier between worlds was open, and the Celts used every tool at their disposal to peer through it. But this porous veil was a double-edged sword. While it allowed for glimpses into the future, it also allowed things and beings from the other world to cross into ours. And not all of them were friendly. This is where we get to the heart of the fear and protective magic associated with this time of year. The Celts believed that on Samhain the spirits of their ancestors would return to visit their former homes. To welcome them, people would set a place for them at the dinner table and leave out offerings of food and drink. It was a night of remembrance, a way to honor the family line and maintain a connection with those who had passed on. These ancestral spirits were generally seen as benevolent, or at least neutral, a comforting presence in the encroaching darkness. However, alongside the beloved dead came other, more dangerous entities. The Talis Psi Asterisk, a powerful and often malevolent race of supernatural beings, or fairies, were also free to roam the human world on this night. These weren't the tiny, winged sprites of Victorian fancy. These were formidable, capricious beings who could blight crops, sicken livestock, and even abduct humans, spiriting them away to the other world forever. This was a night of profound spiritual danger. So how did you protect yourself? How did you move about in the darkness, when the air itself was thick with otherworldly spirits, both good and ill? This is where we find the ancient roots of our modern Halloween costumes. The practice was known as guising, or mumming. People, particularly young men, would disguise themselves to fool the spirits. They would wear masks, often grotesque and frightening, and costumes made from animal skins, hides, or straw. The idea was twofold. First, by appearing as a terrifying spirit yourself, you might trick the truly dangerous Aos into leaving you alone. It was a form of supernatural camouflage. If you looked like one of them, they might pass you by without causing any harm. It was a way of blending in with the chaos of the night, rather than standing out as a vulnerable human target. The second purpose was even more fascinating. The guisers would travel from house to house, often in a procession, acting as representatives of the spirits. They would recite verses, sing songs, or perform little plays in exchange for food. This wasn't just begging, it was a sacred duty. The food they collected was an offering given on behalf of the household to the spirits of the night, ensuring the family's good fortune and protection. By giving a treat, a soul cake, a piece of fruit, a portion of the harvest feast, a household was essentially paying a tribute to the otherworldly powers, placating them and ensuring they would pass by peacefully. This act of sharing the community's bounty with the unseen world was a critical part of maintaining balance. And if a household refused to give an offering, well, that's where the trick comes in. Any misfortune that befell that stingy household in the coming days, a fence torn down, a cow gone dry, a tool mysteriously broken, would be blamed on the offended spirits. The guisers weren't threatening to perform the mischief themselves. They were simply warning the household of the consequences of disrespecting the powerful forces that held sway on this one night of the year. So you see, this was a far cry from a child in a superhero costume asking for candy. This was a deadly serious ritual, a negotiation with chaos. The costumes themselves were profoundly symbolic. When a young man donned a horse's skull or wrapped himself in the hide of a freshly slaughtered bull, he wasn't just playing dress-up. He was engaging in a form of shamanic transformation. For that one night, he ceased to be himself, becoming an embodiment of the otherworld, a vessel for the spirit of the animal or the ancestor he was portraying. This anonymity was crucial. Behind the mask, social hierarchies dissolved. The son of a chieftain and the son of a farmer were equals, both rendered anonymous and liminal, walking the threshold between the village and the void. Their costumes, often assembled from the very elements of the harvest and the hunt, straw woven into monstrous shapes, gourds hollowed out and carved with grimacing faces, the bones and skins of animals, were a direct link to the cycles of life and death that defined their existence. They were wearing the very essence of the season. And at the heart of all this activity, blazing against the encroaching darkness of the new year, were the bonfires. Samhain was, above all, a fire festival. All hearth fires in the homes would be extinguished before the festival began. This was a symbolic death of the old year. Then, the Druid priests would light a great sacred bonfire on a hilltop, using friction to create a need fire, a pure flame untouched by human hands. This fire was a beacon of hope, a source of purification and a powerful ward against malevolent spirits. From this central bonfire, every family would take an ember or a lit torch to relight their own hearth. This single act reconnected the entire community, linking every home to the sacred center, and ensuring that the protective magic of the community's fire would last them through the long, dark winter months. Now, imagine our geysers in this context. They didn't just appear out of the darkness. Their procession often began at the great bonfire. They would dance around the flames, their grotesque costumes flickering in the firelight, their chants and songs rising with the smoke. They were, in a sense, consecrated by the fire before they began their journey through the village. When they traveled from house to house, they were not just asking for offerings, they were carrying the spirit of that sacred fire with them. They were a moving ward, a procession of controlled chaos that tested the community's readiness for the winter. Their arrival at a doorstep was a test of hospitality and faith. To give them food was to honor the spirits, to acknowledge the ancestors, and to show that your household was in alignment with the sacred order of the night. The soul cakes they collected, for instance, were not just simple treats. These were small, often spiced, round cakes, and it was believed that for every cake eaten, a soul was freed from purgatory. So when the geysers accepted a soul cake, they were performing a spiritual service for the household's dead relatives. This deepens the meaning of the exchange immensely. It becomes a transaction that bridges the worlds of the living and the dead, mediated by these strange, costumed figures. And the threat of a trick becomes clearer too. It wasn't about vandalism for the sake of it. A trick might involve unhinging a gate to let livestock wander, or moving a farmer's plow to the middle of a field. These were acts of disorder, symbolic of the greater chaos that would befall a household that had cut itself off from the community and the spirit world. By refusing to participate in the gift-giving, the geysers were merely demonstrating on a small scale the consequences of that spiritual isolation. They were holding up a mirror to the household, showing them the chaos they were inviting into their lives. This brings us to the nature of the disguises themselves. Why the grotesque faces, the animal skins, the cross-dressing? This wasn't a beauty contest. It was a profound act of magical transformation and self-preservation. Think about it. If the veil between worlds is thin, and all manner of spirits, ancestors, fairies, and darker entities are walking the earth, you wouldn't want to be easily identifiable as a vulnerable human. The costume was a form of spiritual camouflage. By donning a mask, often carved from wood or leather, and cloaking yourself in straw or tattered rags, you ceased to be yourself. You became an anonymous figure, a spirit among spirits. The truly malevolent forces, the ones you really had to worry about, might overlook you, mistaking you for one of their own kind. It's a principle we see in nature, mimicry as a defense mechanism, but it goes deeper than that. It's also an act of sympathetic magic. By dressing as a powerful animal, like a stag with antlers or a wild boar with a tusked mask, the geysers sought to embody the strength and otherworldly power of that creature. They weren't just pretending. They were attempting to channel that animal's spirit, to borrow its ability to navigate the dangerous spiritual landscape of the night. The costumes were not meant to be scary in the way we think of it today, a cheap thrill. They were meant to be genuinely unsettling, to blur the lines and confuse the very definition of what is human and what is not. In that confusion, there was safety. This transformation placed the geyser in a unique position. They became a liminal figure, belonging neither to the village nor to the spirit world but walking the boundary between them. This is crucial. Because they existed in this in-between state, they could act as intermediaries. They could safely approach the homes of the living on behalf of the spirits, and they could carry messages and blessings from the living back to the realm of the ancestors. Their journey through the village was a physical manifestation of the night's spiritual reality. They were the living embodiment of the thin veil walking, breathing paradoxes that made the abstract concept of Samhain tangible and immediate for everyone. And they were not a silent procession. The modern image of a quiet, spooky Halloween night is a much later invention. The geysers. Progress was accompanied by a tremendous amount of noise. They would carry rattles made from gourds filled with dried beans, they might bang pots and pans, and they would engage in loud, rhythmic chanting or sing specific songs meant to ward off evil. This wasn't just celebratory noise. It was a weapon. It was believed that evil spirits were repelled by loud, discordant sounds and by the joyous, life-affirming energy of music. So the cacophony that followed the geysers was a protective shield of sound, an auditory bonfire that cleansed the path before them and drove malevolent influences away from the houses they visited. Their arrival at a door was not a stealthy creep, but a boisterous, clamoring announcement that the forces of community and life were pushing back against the encroaching darkness. The offerings they received also went beyond the soul cakes. While those were central to the spiritual transaction with the dead, other gifts acknowledged the different facets of the season. Apples were a common offering, and for the Celts, the apple was a sacred fruit, a symbol of immortality and a key to the other world. The mythical land of Avalon is literally the Isle of Apples. To give an apple was to offer a symbol of life and a connection to that magical realm. Nuts, particularly hazelnuts, were also given. The hazel was the tree of wisdom and divination. To share your store of nuts was to share the hope of wisdom and insight for the coming year. And of course there was ale or mead, the drinks of feasting and communion. Sharing a drink with a geyser was a way of sharing a moment of fellowship with the entire spirit world they represented. A toast to the ancestors and the spirits of the land, ensuring their goodwill. The costumes themselves were not the sanitized, store-bought creations we know today. They were deeply connected to the earth and the cycle of life and death. Geysers would often wear animal hides or even the heads and skulls of animals like horses, goats, or stags. Think about what that means. To wear the skin of a stag wasn't just a disguise. It was an attempt to channel the power and spirit of that animal. An animal that could navigate the deep woods, the liminal spaces. It was a form of sympathetic magic. Others might be clad in straw, representing the harvested grain, the ghost of the summer's bounty. Their faces would be obscured not by plastic masks, but by soot, clay, or crude masks carved from wood or gourds. The goal was total anonymity, a complete shedding of one's mortal identity. For that night, you were not the farmer, the blacksmith, or the weaver. You were an elemental force, a spirit of the wild, a messenger from the ancestors. This act of donning the guise was a profound ritual of transformation. In many shamanic traditions, there is the concept of becoming a hollow bone, a vessel through which the spirit world can interact with the physical one. In a way, each geyser became a hollow bone for the night of Samhain. By surrendering their identity, they made space for something else to enter. They were no longer just a person in a costume, they were a living, walking piece of the other world. This is a powerful concept, one that suggests a much deeper psychological and spiritual experience than simply dressing up for fun. It was about willingly stepping out of the safety of your own skin and your known identity to mediate with the unknown. It required courage. It required a belief that you could walk that boundary and return. And this is where we find the ancient, tangled roots of trick-or-treat. The spirits of Samhain, like the Celtic gods themselves, were not inherently good or evil. They were forces of nature, and nature can be both bountiful and destructive. The geysers, embodying these spirits, carried that same duality. If a household was generous and welcoming, offering food, drink, and respect, the geysers would bestow a blessing in return. They might recite a poem wishing good fortune on the family and their livestock for the coming winter. But if a household refused to participate, if they barred their door and offered nothing, they were seen as breaking a sacred social and spiritual contract. They were hoarding their resources and disrespecting the spirits at the most crucial time of year. In response, the geysers might perform a trick or an act of mischief. This wasn't malicious vandalism. You wouldn't find them burning a barn. Instead, the tricks were symbolic and chaotic. They might unlatch a gate to let the livestock wander out, or move a farmer's cart to the top of a haystack, or knock on doors and windows and then disappear. These acts were meant to be disruptive, to introduce a small, temporary dose of the other world's chaos into the orderly human world. It was a ritualized warning, a reminder that fortune is fickle and that the goodwill of the spirits and the community should not be taken for granted. It reinforced the idea that everyone had a role to play in maintaining the balance. Prosperity was a shared responsibility, and failing to share your good fortune could invite misfortune. Furthermore, the exchange was never one-sided. The geysers were expected to earn their keep. They were performers. Upon arriving at a door, they would be asked to sing a song, play a tune on a simple flute or whistle, or recite a traditional verse. This is a crucial element that has been almost entirely lost. It wasn't a demand for a handout, it was a transaction. The household provided a physical offering, the soul cake, the apple, the ale, and in return, the geysers provided a spiritual and artistic one. They brought the gift of music, poetry, and blessing directly to the hearth. This performance was part of the magic, an infusion of living art and sacred verse into the home that served to strengthen its spiritual defenses and affirm its connection to the community and the traditions that held it together. It turned the entire night into a sprawling, interactive folk play, with the whole village as the stage and every resident an actor. So what we see today is the faint echo of a profound ritual, a sacred exchange designed to maintain balance not just between worlds, but within the community itself. It makes you wonder about the traditions we carry on without always knowing their roots. How much of that original reciprocal spirit, that exchange of performance for provision, do you believe still exists in our modern Halloween celebrations? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy digging into these hidden histories, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because our next video tackles the surprisingly dark origins of the Jack-O-Lantern, and you won't want to miss it. Until then, stay curious. I'm Marco.